All right. Hello everyone. Good to see everybody. This is gonna be a little bit of a different video, but I feel it's important to talk about what I want to talk about, and I will start off. I will start off by saying that there's going to be a lot of prefacing and a lot of kind of build up to actually what I'm going to talk about, because I think this topics like this especially are really personal. They're really like talking about this specifically is really um, takes a lot of courage, I think, and I'm speaking for myself and for anybody else really, but I'm sure you've seen the title already. Yeah, this video is going to be kind of a little bit more serious. It's going to be more about myself and kind of what my life has been like for the past 5 years and kind of how I ended up where I am today. And yeah, I'm sure you've seen by the title, but yeah, this video is about this video is kind of me coming out and announcing that yes, I have some form of schizophrenia, and I have a lot of tendencies that lean towards specific developmental disabilities and emotional mental illness, I guess is the proper term for it. And I thought I would just do a couple. I think my goal is to do a couple videos kind of talking about what I've learned about mental illness, what I've learned about developmental disabilities, and kind of my observations in terms of where that comes from, where that mental illness can come from, where that developmental disabilities can come from. And I kind of just want to do a discussion about, what it's like for someone who has mental illness. And I guess this is more for the audience than, well, I guess part of it is for my sake, just to be able to kind of talk about a very serious topic with you guys. And then also the other part is kind of showing people that may not have severe mental illness, and kind of showing them what it's kind of like to have, really, to be different. I think that's kind of what I would say modern, 2021, that's what 2021 is all about. It's like, what is it like to be a different person? And I think the really cool thing that we can do that I can do as a content creator and other people can do is kind of help themselves relate to other people that may not be so relatable. I'm thinking specifically like trans people, people with mental illness, people with developmental disabilities. I think I'm seeing a lot of really positive work happening around kind of showing people what it's like to live a different life, and what it's like to live a life that's probably more challenging than some other people. And I think the hard thing about talking about these kinds of things is that everyone's life is difficult, but it's kind of like understanding where people's specialities lie. I think this video specifically will be talking about kind of my specialization and kind of this idea that I've learned where a lot of people have mental illness tendencies, or they have certain disability tendencies. And I think it's important to reflect and say that I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose people, but also people online can't diagnose you. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that the only person that knows or that can give you a diagnosis is your doctor or your therapist or your psychiatrist. And I think I don't see it all the time, but I see it enough where it kind of makes me sad, where I see a lot of commenters especially really being abusive and being really rude and inconsiderate towards people with mental illness. And it's kind of a phrase that I think of where it's like, I think what you're believing is wrong. That's kind of the gist of what I'm getting at, where like I see it all the time. Well, all the time is a bad way of phrasing it, but I will say I see it enough, like I said before. I see it enough to where I don't like it, and I want people to know that I don't think they should be acting that way. And the idea is like, if someone feels confident enough for them to talk about their mental illness or talk about what they feel or what they believe, I don't think it's your place to comment on it. And I'm talking specifically to you, the internet commenter, you, the person who has a tendency to comment on videos like this or comment on trans people's videos or women's videos or anything really, where I think it's just not really someone's place to comment on that kind of stuff. I think if what you're seeing, I think that there's very few examples where it really makes sense for someone to comment on another person's way of life, and I would say that it only really makes sense if what you're seeing is dangerous or harmful to another person. And like if someone is online and talking about hurting themselves or hurting others, or if someone is online talking about how I don't even know, I think you can tell as a human being, you can tell when someone's ideas are not healthy or not beneficial. And I think this is something that I want to get into more. I'm going to get started in a little bit. I just wanted to kind of talk about if you don't understand where someone is coming from, then it probably means that you shouldn't be talking about that specifically. I think schizophrenia is a really easy example where people will comment and say you're faking it, like you're lying about having a mental illness, and that is an incredibly offensive thing to say. That is an incredibly short-sighted and self-centered thing to say. And if you're watching this and you've commented like that, I'm sure my words aren't going to change your mind, but I just want to express that people who comment on other people's mental illness, you should take that with a grain of salt. If you are someone who has mental illness, if you are someone who has depression or anxiety or anything like that, and you see internet comments, be very careful with what you take away from those comments. And I think if someone does comment, I think there's a way to comment in a positive way, and there's a way to say like, hey, you are talking about schizophrenia. I feel that I have some tendencies of schizophrenia. This is what I go through. I think really mental illness is an incredibly personal thing, and if someone isn't just expressing their own personal opinion and their own story, if they're kind of judging another person based on mental illness or kind of giving their opinion on someone else's life, I think that's very dangerous and not a healthy thing to do. So yeah, we've been going for 7 minutes. I'll tell you right now, this is not going to be a short video. This is going to be pretty lengthy. I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff, some stuff that's a little personal, family matters and whenever you talk about mental illness and mental health especially, it's a very, I'll say it over and over again, it is core to who you are, and it is defined by who you are, and everybody's mental illness is unique to them, and I think relating to someone else is important to do in a positive way and not in a negative way. And if you hear someone talking about their mental illness or whatever, I think it's important to try and give them the benefit of the doubt and try and understand where they're coming from, even if what they're saying doesn't necessarily make sense to you. So with that, I think we'll get started. I've kind of broken this down into a couple sections. Over here I have, give me 1 second, I have 6 different sections. Just some quick bullet points that I wrote down about kind of an outline of how I want this video to be laid out. So, I'm going to start off talking about kind of my early days, like how I learned that I have this schizophrenia and larger anxiety problems, and talking about where my mental illness comes from, where your mental illness comes from. This is another thing. I'm going to be interchanging I and you a lot, and I'm going to be referring to myself or also to you, the viewer, and I think part of that is I think it's interchangeable. My goal is that you can kind of relate to what I'm talking about, and my goal is to express my ideas in a way that people can understand and take to their own life and hopefully learn from and grow from. I think because really my life for the past 5 years has been defined by growth and kind of being in a situation that felt hopeless and realizing that the situation is only hopeless because I wasn't good enough yet, and the idea that I needed to grow to live a happy life. Like, I wasn't going to be happy until I kind of grew into my mental illness and grew into this idea of who I really am and what I really feel. And so yeah, I guess let's get started. We also, I guess I only did the first section, so I'm being really bad about this outline. So we have like, where does your mental illness come from? And then going along with that is kind of like how I discovered that I have mental illness, and what that meant for me, and how I kind of grew into that. And then that ties into kind of learning about, not necessarily schizophrenia as a whole, but more my unique expression of schizophrenia, and kind of how my life has influenced my mental illness and vice versa. And then also, going along with that, we're going to be trending more towards, how do you grow from having a mental illness? How do you live with it? How do you manage it and still be a functioning member of society while also having this downside, this curse almost that plagues you for your entire life? And I think for me, part of that was kind of being in a healthy environment and changing the world around me to be more supportive of myself and what I want. And then kind of the last two that I want to talk about is like this idea that this inverse idea that every blessing is a curse, but also the inverse is true, that every curse can also be a blessing if you learn about it and understand it and are self-aware about who you are. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is kind of adapting to my own illness and adapting to how schizophrenia and how anxiety and depression can kind of change your brain, and how you need to change your brain to reflect those differences. And like, I'm going to be talking mostly from an anxiety perspective. I did feel that I had some depression for a small amount of my life, but I think what I learned is that my environment was a huge factor into my depression, and that kind of having a better living environment meant having a better mental health environment. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about, is the idea that mental health is kind of a holistic health study, that for you to have a good mental health, you need to have a good physical health, you need to have a good social health. Like, all of these things need to come together, and if you're lacking in certain areas, then your mental health will suffer, and then it becomes kind of a feedback loop. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So like, let's go back then. So this will be part one. This will be section one. I'm going to try and split this up into chapters so that people can kind of skip around. So this will be part one, where I talk about, where does my mental illness come from? Where does your mental illness come from? And I think largely it's pretty simple. It comes from your parents, right? Both genetically and emotionally. You think about this very core concept, which is nature versus nurture, and this idea that it's kind of like your parents gave you things in a genetic sense, but they also gave you things in a sense of you watched them grow. Like, as you grew up, you watched them live, and so your child brain is internalizing things about your parents that then you reflect later on in your life. And it takes a long time for you to realize, like, oh, I got this trait from my mom, and I got this trait from my dad, or whatever. And I think part of that is, let's say you're a child of a gay couple and you have two mothers. Well, I don't want to be sexist, but I will say that women tend to have different personality traits than men, and part of having a father and a mother is that you have a male role model and a female role model, so that you understand how people interact in that specific way. And the idea that women tend to have different personalities than men, and it's kind of what I've observed. And this is what I want to get at, is I'm not really giving you concrete facts. I'm saying this is what I've observed, is that, like, my mom tends to have specific personality traits that I can see in myself, and my dad has specific personality traits that I also see in myself. But what I've learned is that those personality traits are kind of reflections of uh, very basic, kind of not severe uh, disorders or tendencies that I kind of think about. Like, I use my dad as an example because I think I would say that he has a lot of what I would call Asperger's tendencies that are kind of like he wouldn't be diagnosed as having Asperger's, right? Because he doesn't fit the qualifications, he doesn't fit the criteria. But I think a lot of his actions, a lot of his personality is a reflection of somewhat being from Asperger's, and that it's kind of this idea that very specific things that I've noticed in people, I tend to correlate with specific larger disorders and personality disorders, and I think with men especially, it tends to lean more towards the autism side of the spectrum, where I think what you'll find is that a lot of men don't feel emotion in the same way that women do, and a lot of men it's hard to describe. Like, I kind of have to get talking about it to kind of really understand what I'm getting at. But it's this idea that I think fundamentally men see the world in a different way, and I think that has a lot to do with empathy and sympathy, and this idea that I think certain emotions are learned and they're not necessarily innate. Like, you're not born with certain emotions. It's kind of like you have to be around friends to kind of understand, like, oh, this is exciting, this is fun, this is scary. So it's kind of like what I've learned is that it's important to have people in your life, because those people will help you learn about different emotions. And I think me especially, and my family, we tend to have those kinds of disconnected, like a little bit socially anxious, where when other people are uncomfortable, we start to feel uncomfortable, and we don't really know how to react, and it's kind of like a difficult situation to be in. And I think that's all kind of a reflection of somewhat being Asperger's tendencies, that I think people with Asperger's don't necessarily understand emotions in the same way that people who don't have those tendencies do, where, like, certain social cues just won't be picked up on. Like, if someone is feeling sad, what I've noticed is, like, I think people with Asperger's tendencies tend to go on the defensive when someone is uncomfortable. They tend to kind of close in and follow these specific trends, I guess I would say. Like, I think my dad specifically, he tries to add levity to the situation regardless of what the situation is specifically. So he has a tendency to be like, let's say my mom is upset. I think what happens is he tries to make a joke out of it, because he doesn't really understand, like, what exactly is the right course of action. He's not able to, I think it's kind of like a computer where certain situations necessitate certain responses, and when the response doesn't create the right idea, then there's kind of this disconnect. And it's like this idea that like, someone is crying in front of you, and you or like me as a person with Asperger's tendencies, they might make a joke instead of trying to console that person, because in every other situation, making a joke has worked. And so kind of they have this idea that oh, if someone is uncomfortable, then I just need to do this, this, and this, and then things will be better. And so it's kind of like you create these systems that you can follow, and it becomes more structured and becomes less subjective about, like, how you're supposed to act. And that's a little going a little too in depth. But I think I will say that both of my parents have a lot of anxiety problems, and, like, in almost every situation, they're worriers to the nth degree, and they are. They're worried about every situation. They're worried about the worst possible outcome. And I think it just, like as a child, it kind of created this sense of like, you're just worried all the time. You're just worried about something going wrong. And, I think what I found is that they got in fights a lot. And so as a child, I was always worried about, my parents. I was worried about where they are. What are they doing? Are they coming into my room? Because I was worried about, I was afraid. Like that's about it, is that I was afraid of my parents, and I was afraid of how they treated each other. I was afraid of how they treated me. And it kind of reflected itself in this idea that I was always listening for them. I was always worried about, are they coming in the door? Are they coming around the corner? And I think what I would say is, this is kind of leading into section number 2, where, in section number 1, I'm talking about like, what is the impetus of mental illness? And really the impetus is that every generation puts an illness on the next generation. Like, as a parent, you're going to have to accept that your personality will bleed into your child's personality, and that they will probably pick up some kind of mental illness, or they will pick up some kind of developmental tendency that they will have to learn to appreciate and learn to grow from. And part of it is just accepting that fact that, every parent, no matter how well they try, they will always imprint on their child, and that sometimes it won't be a positive imprint. Sometimes it'll be a negative imprint. And as a parent, your goal should be to improve and to acknowledge that, and to try and help your child through that situation. And I think, I think what I would say is definitely the first, when I first learned about my mental illness, I don't think my parents were very supportive and understanding. And I think, in a lot of ways, this is getting into section 2, which is kind of discovering that I have a mental illness, and really this idea that mental illness sometimes has a catalyst, and that a lot of times you don't know you have a mental illness until I would say high school, like freshman year of high school, maybe even when you're graduating middle school. Like that's kind of what I learned, where like I started to use drugs, and I found that it was nice, because like if I would smoke weed, then I wouldn't be worried about my parents. I wouldn't be afraid of them coming in the door and being angry at me, or I wouldn't be worried about them being angry at each other, and kind of this idea that as a child, all of those negative emotions that were like this house was full of negative emotions, and like when I was using drugs, I didn't feel those negative emotions, and it was such a positive thing for me, and it was such a life-changing thing that I realized, like, oh, like living in this house creates an immense amount of anxiety just for me, period. Like, and that just being around my parents in general just is extremely taxing, and it's almost a burden on my existence, because I know that they're constantly expressing negative emotions towards each other, and there's always this animosity, and we've known about this mental illness for long enough that I think they've improved a lot, but I still think like I still feel that way, and I still think that using drugs was a great way for me to not feel that, and actually relax and feel like, oh, I can focus on a video game, or I can focus on a TV show, or a YouTube video, or something, or anything, and I think part of that was, I think the ADHD personality, like the tendencies and the Asperger's tendencies, I kind of hyper focused on wanting to, I hyper focused on my parents, and I was kind of really aware of when they were expressing negative emotions, and I think for me, like using marijuana what gave me that ability to focus on other things and not be thinking about is mom yelling at dad, is dad yelling at mom, and more be thinking about, oh, what am I doing in my game, what am I watching on YouTube. And it's kind of like, and I think that was hard for my parents to understand, that that a drug could be a positive thing in any way. And like, I think my mom especially was incredibly afraid that I was going to turn out like a junkie, and that makes me sad, but that's just how she is, because she's from Kansas. Like, she doesn't deal with this stuff. She doesn't understand it, and so she's afraid of it. And I think I suffered because of that, where when I used drugs, I actually felt comfortable. But then once my parents realized that I used drugs, then they were even more oppressive, and they were even more overbearing, and they were even more of a burden on my life. And so it kind of compounded on itself in such a negative way that, I had a panic attack because I was using drugs, and I felt that it was a positive thing, but my parents were telling me that it was killing me, and my parents were telling me that I shouldn't be using it because it's dangerous. And really what I learned was they just don't understand, and because they don't understand, they continued to push and push and push, and that was kind of a catalyst for kind of the impetus of my schizophrenia coming to fruition and actually having a physical hallucination, and it all began because of them, I would say. And I think they've acknowledged that fact, but I think that's still difficult to say that, like as a parent, you try to help your child feel healthy, but sometimes you helping them is actually the most detrimental thing you can do. And I just don't think they were ready to help me yet. I don't think they understood how to help me, and that's hard, but it's the truth. Like, and that's how I see it. And it's scary, but I think they've grown because of that. And I think, so I would say, like, for me, the discovering that I have the mental illness was kind of like doing drugs for the first time. And it like, I think a lot of people say that, marijuana can be a catalyst for mental illness, and I tend to agree with that. I think, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily in the way that you think, I think is what I would say, where, kind of when I used weed, what I found is that I discovered that the only time that I wasn't mentally ill was when I was using, because that I was able to relax, and that was a catalyst in a different way, in an inverse way, where I kind of realized, like, the problem isn't necessarily the drug. The problem is my environment, and the drug just showed me that my environment was the problem. And then my environment got even worse, and it got even more severe. And so we're kind of bleeding into the next section. So I think we should kind of move on, and I think we'll kind of combine these next two sections and talk about, like, okay, what is it actually like for me when I have schizophrenia? Like, what does that actually entail? And I think it began as, like, this feeling that I was always being watched, because I was always being watched, that my parents were always stalking me. They were always worried about what I was doing. They were always checking to see if I was using. They were always doing that. And so it was this very real feeling that I was being watched all the time. And that developed into a physical hallucination. And actually, like, if I scoop my chair over here, the hallucination stands right there. Like, right where that, you see that fan over there? Like, that's where he stands. He's a real thing. Like, I feel him. He's real. And this is what's, you get into, this is where I don't want commenters to be like, that's bullshit. Like, I don't think anyone should be commenting on my mental illness. Like, that's just offensive to me. But I'm being honest that, like, when I'm going to bed, sometimes I struggle to sleep. I have really bad insomnia, and I think part of that is that I'm being watched, and like my adrenaline will suddenly spike because I can feel him. I can feel him standing right there, and I can see him, and I can feel him, and I feel that there's a real living presence standing right in my room, and I've never been able to make that go away. I've never been able to not feel like, ever since those couple years, like, that's never gone away. It's a permanent thing for me, and so that's been a huge point of growth for me, where, like, I drink a lot of water, so I have to get up and piss a lot at night, and what happens is, like, my heart rate will spike. Like, my heart rate will be at like 150 or like 130, and I can tell because I'm feeling all these hallucinations around me. You know, I'm feeling him over in the corner when it's pitch black. I walk down this long hallway, and the whole hallway just feels like I'm in another world, and it's hard for me, but I have to accept it, and that's what my life is like now. You know, like I have a different level of anxiety. I have a different level of kind of like adrenaline. Like I can almost activate my adrenaline on cue because I know, I it's like it's almost like a choice. Like when I feel him, when I feel these hallucinations, my body instinctually goes into fight mode. Like my energy level spikes, my adrenaline spikes, and it's very real to me. It's a very real feeling of something bad is going to happen, and I think largely I've been able to make that a beneficial part of my life, but that is a real part of my life that, in certain situations, I think I kind of lose control, and I kind of have this animalistic, almost like the lizard brain, it activates. And I think that's kind of the scarier part of my schizophrenia, but I think also it has some good sides to it too, where I have a lot of characters. I think that's also a reflection of schizophrenia, where I think about, like, it's really easy for me to create a character. It's really easy for me to relate with a character that I've created. So, like, when I'm writing my book, it's really easy to create villains, because I think in a lot of ways I can relate with a villain more than I can with a hero. Like, a villain is kind of like this broken person that, it's like a mental illness that's gone to the extreme, and I can relate with that. And because that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of being a psychopath. I'm afraid of being a murderer, where one day I have a psychotic break and then I lose control over my entire life. I just lose control. And I think that's what I'm writing about. Is I'm writing about this idea that, I have this problem about me, and I have to stay in control. And if I don't stay in control, then I don't know what's going to happen, and that's very scary to me. But that's life. I gotta live with it. Okay, so we're at half an hour, and I'm still going strong. So we're gonna kind of move on a little bit. I hope you guys are kind of understanding where this is coming from. That, like, I'm not a lot of people know me, but I'll say people who do know me probably can understand where I'm coming from when I'm talking about this stuff. But I think a lot of people will relate more with the positive aspects of it. That I'm really good at characters. I'm really good at doing impressions and voices and coming up with weird, wacky people that are fundamentally me. It's me on the inside, but I feel that it's not me. Like, I can kind of embody this other person, and I can kind of express myself in a unique way, and it's easy for me to be a method actor, I guess is what I would say. And I think that's part of being in a healthy environment. And this is getting into section number 4, where I'm kind of trying to think about, like, hey, I have this problem. I have this tendency that I have these patterns that I follow. How can I make it a positive thing? Like, how can I continue to live a positive life? Because that's, I think this is a good time to talk about kind of being depressed and feeling hopeless and feeling like the world will never be in your favor. And I think a lot of where my depression came from was not being in a healthy environment, and not being in a place where I felt that I was being supported, and not being in a place that I felt that I was comfortable. And I think, this is what's so hard about being a parent, is that your child is stuck with you, and your child doesn't have the money to live on their own, and is not prepared to live on their own yet. And so they're stuck with you, and they're stuck with all the problems that you have. And for me, that was incredibly, incredibly detrimental to my health. I had parents who wanted me to go to college. I went to college. I hated it. But I knew that my parents were not going to like it, that I didn't want to go to college, and that ate away at me, and that was really, really detrimental to my health. And I had to have several conversations where I said, hey, the way that you treat me is not beneficial to my health. And I think what I learned is that it's really hard for someone to accept that. It's really hard for someone to acknowledge that their actions cause other people harm, and that they have to change, or else the people that they love will continue to be harmed. And I think that was what was so hard for me, is really having the confidence to tell my parents that their parenting style was incredibly detrimental to my health, and that if they wanted a healthy son, that they were going to have to treat me differently. And I think that was hard for them to accept, because they've never been in a situation where they've done anything, or they've, I think that's the most severe situation that they've ever been in, where they've never really had to adapt. They've never really had to change who they are to better suit other people, right? I think people have always changed to suit them. And, that's what I think seeing how their personalities are is kind of shows me that they never really changed to make anyone else happy. That they never really had to change. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think it's eventually you will run into a problem. And I want to talk about this now from my perspective, where I think about the fact that my personality and who I am is probably going to cause more people harm that I don't even know yet. I'm probably going to have a significant other that I'm going to treat poorly because of who I am. And that, I've been in relationships where I said, I don't want to change who I am. And that's the wrong way to go about it. People care about you and you care about other people. And so part of making sure that other people have a healthy environment is being healthy enough to where you can change and you can adapt yourself to help other people feel better and to be more supportive of other people. And I think parents especially, probably more so than anyone, probably struggle with that, because they've been right in every situation. Like, they've been the ones who have told the child how to act. And so they've been the one in power. And then when the child says to them that their actions hurt them, then the parent has to have the realization that all of their parenting that they've done, they now need to adapt and change who they are and be a different person and express themselves in different ways. And I think that's hard for people to accept, but I think part of having a mental illness is being that person, right? Like, part of me growing up was realizing that if I want to be happy, I need to change. And coming to that realization that if other people want to be happy and they ask me to change, that I need to take that seriously. And that if someone says to me that my actions are causing them harm, that should hurt, that should feel bad, and that should make me want to change and make me want to, be a better person. And I think mental illness gives you the ability to be aware of yourself. And when you have these glaring problems, when you have these big scary problems that feel impossible to deal with, I think what happens is you have to grow. You have to grow up and you have to mature more than probably other people have. Like, I think this is something that you as the audience should be looking out for, like paying attention for the level of emotional maturity, that when someone says, I'm willing to change to make you feel better, that you should listen, because that person has obviously been through a lot, and they're aware enough of themselves that they can acknowledge that they need to do better. And I think that's something that people should be appreciative of, and people should acknowledge and be proud of, and say, and just, be supportive of. And like, let's say you're in a relationship and your significant other is treating you poorly. I think if you can be that mature person and be honest with them and say, and be very supportive and say, hey, like, some of your actions are causing me harm, that you're mature enough to be able to say, I can wait and I can allow you to grow as a person, because growth always takes a long time and growth is always difficult. And so I think that's a pretty good, like, what does it mean to be in a healthy environment? Well, it's kind of a holistic thing. Like, if you're like most mental illness comes out in high school, and so a lot of kids in high school have parents that treat them very poorly, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of kids can relate to that your parents do things and treat you in a certain way, and their actions have definitely caused harm to you. And I would hope that your parents are mature enough people that they can acknowledge that and be aware of that and say, I will try to grow, and I will respect your wishes, and I will try and make this environment a healthier place. I think this is a conversation that every child should be having, right? Like, you should be talking to your parents and saying, hey, I don't like it when you do this. I don't like it when you do that. I don't like it when you call me this or treat me in this specific way. And it's like, this is why I feel for people who are transitioning, is like, I would hate to be in that situation where not only do you not feel like yourself, not only do you feel like a stranger in another person's body, but if your parents aren't supportive of you, then now you have two problems to deal with. Now you have your own personal problem, but you also have your parents' problem. And part of being a child is realizing your parents have problems, right? Your parents are not perfect people. They can improve, and they should improve. And if they do improve, then it'll make their child's life better. And that's what every parent should want. They should want their child to have a good life. And so it's like, I want to make this video to show people that, like, hey, if you're in high school, if you're in college and you're realizing that there's something different about you, that there's some unique thing that maybe you've gone to a therapist and they've diagnosed you, or maybe they haven't, it doesn't discount your feelings. That your feelings are important, incredibly important, because you represent your parents' next generation, and they should be supportive of you, right? They should be supportive of you unconditionally. They shouldn't ask for a justification. They shouldn't ask you to prove that you have a mental illness. They should just believe you because they trust you, because they love you, right? And I think some people, right, not everyone is going to have parents that love them, and I'm sorry, but though your parents need to acknowledge that they don't love you, or at least, you know, maybe you trap them in a corner where they're forced to acknowledge that they don't act based on their child's best interest. And it's like, I think this is an incredibly hard thing for a child to deal with, especially someone who's going through high school, going through college, trying to get a job. To have parents that aren't supportive of you is one of the hardest things to go through, but it's unique to you. If your parents aren't supportive of you, that's your problem, and you have to be able to improve that situation, or at least get out of that environment. You need to be able to create that healthy environment, and if you can't, then you need to figure out some way how, and someone's not going to do it for you, right? Someone's not going to improve your life for you. If you want your life to improve, you have to do it yourself. And part of that might be telling your parents and sitting down with them and talking to them until they listen, until they understand what you're saying, right? Like, people can stop talking, but that doesn't mean that they're actually listening to you, right? I think as a human, you can tell when someone's listening to you. You can tell when they're accepting the words you're saying and listening and really internalizing what you're saying. And if your parents aren't internalizing what you're saying, then you need to continue to talk to them until they do. And this is something that is your responsibility, that your mental health is your responsibility. And if you want to be happy, you have to push for it. You have to try, right? Like, if you are feeling depressed, you have to try. Medicine is not going to make you feel better. Therapy is not going to make you feel better. You have to care. You have to want to improve, and you have to acknowledge and be aware of how you can improve. And it's like, I'm trying to be harsh. I'm going to be honest. I'm being a little harsh because I want to show people that that mental health is not an easy task. And I don't want to hear people complaining in the or at all. I don't want to hear people complaining. You either fight for your mental health or you suffer. And that's how you live. You either fight or you die. That's what survival is. And part of having that mental health is realizing that you need to survive. Like, you're not just like, you can't kill yourself. You can't just end your life. It doesn't just end, right? That's never the right solution. Like, I'm sure there are people that feel that way, but that just means they have more room to grow. They need more time to realize that the whole point of life is struggling. The whole point of life is to have that pain so that then you can grow from that pain. And this is getting into the next section. This is section 5. And I'm talking about every blessing is a curse, but also curses can be blessings. And part of having a mental illness is getting control of your mental illness and getting on top of it and growing because of your mental illness, and being able to acknowledge your shortcomings and being able to acknowledge, how can I do better? How can I feel better? And coming up with maybe not a concrete plan, but at least coming up with something, right? At least having the confidence to do something, all right? And part of me growing up and maturing is realizing that a lot of it is just conviction. A lot of mental illness is having the conviction to say, I want to feel better. To say, like, I want my life to be better. And I think part of that for me especially was realizing that if I want to feel better, I have to let my family know that I expect better from them because they've treated me poorly. And okay, we'll take it back, and I'll say my depression was pretty bad for a long time, and I think it kind of had an epiphany moment, kind of a turnaround moment, where I was sitting and I was talking with my therapist, and she told me, you need to talk to your parents. And she told me that over and over and over again, and I was so afraid. But one day I accepted that I needed to talk to, and I just accepted that fact, and I had to sit down, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I started tearing up because it was so hard for me to tell my parents no. Like, it was so hard for me to tell my parents stop and to tell them that what they're doing is wrong. And it was hard because my parents beat into me that their word was law, and that if I did something wrong or if I disappointed them, that it was my fault, and that I was responsible for their like, if I made them feel bad, it was my fault and it was my responsibility. And what I learned is that everything is your responsibility, right? If you make people feel bad, that's your responsibility. But if you are feeling bad, that is also your responsibility. And that sometimes it is just having the conviction to just start talking and start saying, and like, for me, when I talked with my parents, I realized I had been harboring so much resentment for them because they had told me that they were God, that their word was law. And so if I felt bad, it was my fault. And so that creates this resentment, right? That's what parents do, is they tell you how to live because they know best. For the most part, they know best. But at some point you get old enough where you realize they don't know best. They don't know everything in the best way possible because only you know best. Only you know yourself. And for me, the changing point was being aggressive and being hostile towards my parents and being honest and saying, I'm really disappointed in how you've treated me in my life, and say, I really expected better from you and you've hurt me in a lot of ways. And for me, it was being honest and kind of doing the opposite of what I wanted to do, where the depression made me want to made me want to cower. The depression made me want to close in on myself. So I had to do the inverse. I had to do the thing that I was afraid of, where I lost control. I got really angry. I lost control of my emotions, but I needed that. I needed to express that if I wanted to express what I really felt. And then that's when things started changing. And that's when I realized that I'm not that person. I'm not the person who cowers. I'm the person who yells and shouts. And I'm the person who wants things the way he wants it. And now that's my new curse. Before I was cowering, but now I have the opposite problem, and now I have that kind of curse to deal with. And so that curse has been a blessing on me. My temper, which I definitely get from my mom, has been a blessing in my life because it's given me the ability to say what I want to say. And being angry has given me the conviction to say the words that I really wanted to say and that I was afraid to say. And I think, resentment is a reflection of you wanting to say something but not feeling like you have the ability to. And I think a lot of kids can relate to really resenting their parents and having a lot of animosity towards them because they have forced you to live in a specific way and not allowed you to live the way you want. And this is why my heart goes out to anyone who's transitioning, because that is terrifying, to be in a situation where your parents force you to be a specific gender, even if you don't feel that you are that specific gender. That is horrible. That is criminal in my eyes. But you can't send someone to prison for that, right? That's not how families work. Your family has to grow, and your family has to realize that they've hurt you a lot. That's what being a parent is realizing that you've hurt your children, and that your children have these burdens. They have these curses placed upon them, and they need to make that curse into a blessing. That this is what I think about, where I know that my schizophrenia, my personality traits will be reflected on my child in a negative way. But my goal is to show that child that you need to get control over your curses now, and that it's your responsibility now to tell me that I hurt you. And I think part of being more mature is acknowledging that and having that conversation with your parents and saying, I think you hurt me in this way. I think you hurt me in this way. And being honest with them and hoping that your parents can acknowledge that. And I think, after I've had that situation where I've been able to talk with my parents honestly and been able to express my real feelings, it was like a turning point for my mental illness. I feel like I was able to create more characters. I feel like I was able to express myself in different ways, and I relaxed a little bit, knowing that I had support from the people that used to be a burden. Now they are supporting me. It's really a game changer, and I think more people should be thinking about this. And so I think that's kind of like closing out the last section. Is we'll do just kind of a wrap up and say listen, your parents have hurt you. Right? That's step one of acknowledging your parents are not perfect people. They've probably done things that stuck to you, not in a very unique way, where I think it's for a lot of children, look at your parents and then look at yourself and say, I'll take myself as an example. My anger comes from my mom. My anxiety comes from both my mom and my dad. I would say that my kind of my empathy problems, my sympathy problems, those come from my dad, and kind of this fear about people around me, and this idea that I'm always aware of all of the people around me, and I'm always thinking about how people around me are feeling. I get that from my parents because they fought so much, but for me, the game changer was using that to my advantage and saying, hey, my brain is really good at tracking people. My brain is really good at feeling emotions and trusting that what I'm feeling is accurate. And that has helped me a lot, where if I go into a bar and I see a situation, I can tell what's going on pretty quickly. I can feel those emotions that are being expressed by those people. You see the faces, you hear the words that they're saying, and so that has benefited me, where I've been in situations where I can kind of diffuse situations that would have gotten worse, and I can kind of interject in places where things might go bad, or like, I would say sometimes when I'm at the gym, I'm really paying too much attention to the people around me, and that's kind of a negative reflection. So that's why I put in music. That's why I try and drown out my senses, because you know sometimes it's a positive thing, sometimes it's a negative thing, but really it's just a thing, and it's up to you to make it a positive thing or make it a negative thing. And I think that's what's so hard is mental illness is your problem and it's no one else's problem. You can talk about it all day, but if you want to feel better, you have to put in the effort, right? You have to struggle, you have to suffer, you have to cry, because you know that you have a goal in mind, that even if your goal fails, you need another goal, that you can't just give up and give in to the suffering. You can't just allow the mental illness to control you. You have to define the mental illness. And that was super important for me, was kind of like reframing my existence and reframing my mental illness and saying, that hallucination that stands in my room is a real person. I've given him a name, like I've given him form, and I've done that because then he's more real, and I can create a story around where he comes from, what he's like, and I can counter that. And sometimes things don't work, but that worked for me, that I was able to give some understanding to this mental illness that I feel that I had no understanding of. And I feel that I've grown a lot because of how I've framed my mental illness. And part of it was that I didn't want the mental illness to define me. I wanted to define the mental illness. This is how I feel, so it might not relate to you or to anyone else, but I will say you have more control over your mind than you think. And sometimes the secret is believing what you say, and saying something to yourself and believing it. If you're feeling depressed, saying to yourself, I have strengths, right? I have greatness. I am a great person. Everyone is a great person. Everyone has incredible specialities. And so the secret is really believing the words that you say and having the conviction to really sincerely believe that you can grow, and sincerely believe that you can be better, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that the purpose of the tunnel was to make the light brighter. And that the whole point of struggling is that one day you will get control over your struggle, and you will be infinitely stronger because you got control over it, and because you didn't let your illness define you, but you defined your mental illness. So I hope you guys enjoyed. That was an hour long. That was a long discussion. That felt great. It was really good for me to sit down and talk about it and get it out. So we're creeping up on an hour, so I'm just going to cut it right here. So I will say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned from it. I hope that I made sense. So I appreciate you stopping by. Thank you very much. Take care. And